going to curse you, I'm going to curse them. And here we have someone who is indeed cursing not just the Israelites, but also the God. Who is this Lord that I should obey him? And so there is this harshness that Pharaoh is exerting. Again, not a nice guy when we confront him. And so we see that there is this chance after chance that Pharaoh has to say, I give up. The Lord is God. He continues. He persists, and finally, the breakthrough moment, after all else failed, after all of these plagues have transpired, finally, after the killing of the firstborn, there is deliverance for the Israelites. So it's last resort action here. It's not as though God delights in these sorts of things, as Lamentations chapter 3 says, the Lord does not afflict willingly. And so we need to understand that even when we look at the Canaanite wars and so forth, God waits over half a millennium. Genesis 15:16 says, that he's going to wait until the wickedness of the Amorites, the Canaanite peoples, is finally reached full measure. So it would be wrong for the Israelites to go in until that time of ripeness of their sins or wickedness has reached full measure. So there is this timing issue as well. It's not as though this is, say, a precipitous attack or driving out. And to keep in mind that the command of the Israelites was primarily to drive out the Canaanites, that God said he would send his hornet ahead, and that's why it's probably connected to the factor of fear, that he would try to God would instill fear in the hearts of the Canaanites so that they could, after seeing the signs and the wonders, they had plenty of warning themselves. They knew what God did in Egypt. They saw that, they knew that they brought them through the Red Sea, brought them through the Jordan, that this is the God that was trouncing these ancient nations. And so now he is coming to the Canaanites, and they have plenty of warning, plenty of signs and wonders to remind them that they're up against something that is great and powerful, and that they can flee. They have the opportunity to depart, or if they fight, then they know they're up against the God who defeated the Egyptians as well.
Yeah, you were the first one to point that out that I remember, Paul. It's probably back in the Moral Monster book that came out in 2009, and you relate that not every instance where God says annihilate, kill women and children and all this is literal, and you point to Deuteronomy chapter 7 as a reason for that. Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, Deuteronomy, which really ramps up or hyperbolizes a lot of the language from, say, Leviticus, Numbers, Exodus, even, where you have some, God is going to drive out the nations, the Canaanites, like a hornet. Then you get to Deuteronomy and it says, I'm going to drive them out, have no mercy, utterly destroy, and so forth. So you have that very ramped up language, which, as I note, is something that is very clearly hyperbolic. As you look at text after text, and again, I just encourage people to analyze these texts, that where you often see the language of, quote, utter destruction. Again, there's even the question of how to translate that word, quote, utterly destroy, that word haram. Sometimes it could just mean exile. Sometimes it means having a decisive victory. And with regard to Deuteronomy 7, we see this kind of language that's common in the ancient Near East, and of course the Israelites use it as well. This hyperbolic language, man, woman, young, and old, and you don't even have women present or children present or the elderly present. And I could point to battle after battle like the Amalekites or the Amorite kings in Numbers 21, where Deuteronomy will use that language of man, woman, young, and old, even though you go to the original setting. And in Numbers 21, where it says that Moses and the army, by the way, they're fighting a defensive battle. They wanted to pass through peacefully. These two Amorite kings rise up and take arms against them. But it says the king, his sons, and his army are fighting against the Israelites. But then you get to Deuteronomy and it says, man, woman, young, and old. Well, there weren't any women or children on the battlefield. They're not going to be joining. The women and children aren't going to be joining the army and fighting against the Israelites. They're going to be hidden off, and it's going to be combatants between combatants here. So that's just an example. But Deuteronomy 7 says, use that language of utter destruction, and then it goes on to say, and do not intermarry with them. Do not make alliances with them, because what's at issue? It is the identity of Israel. I mean, you can have Canaanites around. There are plenty of Canaanites who join up with the Israelites. They're living in the midst. But so long as the Israelites are in potential compromise with their own mission, their own identity, their own covenant with the Lord, then that's where the trouble is. So it's not the ethnicity of the Canaanites, it's not the fact that the Canaanites are there, but rather, so it's not an ethnic cleansing type of thing here. It's simply a matter of the idolatry, and I use the comparison in my book, Is God a Vindictive Bully, of Nazism, where God is concerned, just as God is concerned to remove the Canaanite identity, and you don't have to remove Canaanites to remove their identity. In Nazi Germany, after the Allies won, they destroyed all of the symbols of Nazism. They destroyed the hierarchy. They destroyed the statues and burned the flags and the monuments, and toppled the monuments and so forth. And at the end of it all, what you had left was a denazified German nation. So that is what, for example, John and Harvey Walton say is to perform haram. It is identity removal without destroying or obliterating the entire nation. So there are a number of questions that come up about this, but as I said, as I go after text, you'll see, it says man, woman, young and old in the book of Joshua, or no survivor. And that's like ancient Near Eastern trash talk, because you look at other passages right next to them, sometimes in the same verse even, or just a chapter or two later, where those same people are still around. So something else is going on here, and it's sort of like our saying about our sports teams today: we totally annihilated that team, we totally destroyed those guys. Well, no one takes that literally, and in the ancient Near East, that was common jargon, common language, as we read the annals of the various pharaohs and others who are using that same kind of language.
Yeah, and the Merneptah Stela, which dates to about 1210 BC, Merneptah the Pharaoh says, Israel's seed is laid waste, as if Israel exists no more, because he apparently defeated them.
That's right.
And it's just not true. Obviously, Israel survived Merneptah, and he was just trash talking. But it is so interesting. So if I'm understanding this right, you say when that battle in Numbers takes place, there's not this obliteration language, but when it's recanted or summarized in Deuteronomy 7, you do have this obliteration language, but the very next verse says, don't intermarry with them. So how could they have obliterated these people, and then why would you have a warning not to intermarry with them if they were obliterated? Which is what Dr. Copan is saying here. And there's much more in the book. Is God a vindictive bully? And not just on warfare, but on slavery, so-called slavery, on women, on many other questions from the Old Testament. So you're going to want to pick up this copy. And we're going to be right back with Dr. Paul Copan. I'm Frank Turk. You're listening to I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, back in 2 minutes.
And my father, your great-grandfather, fought in World War II.
Really?
He was a gunner on a big ship out in the Pacific Ocean.
Wow.
Your great-grandmother did her part, too.
Was she on a ship?
Oh, no. She stayed back home. She and a lot of her friends worked really hard in a factory because the men had gone off to war. And they held scrap metal drives to help in the war effort. The folks back home were heroes, too.
Here at the American Family Association, we consider you the heroes back home. As you fulfill your responsibility of caring for your family day to day, your partnership with us is crucial as we fight the enemies of freedom in America. Thank you for your commitment to the American Family Association.
Grandpa, what's a scrap metal drive?
Let's get some cookies, and I'll tell you all about it.
Dr. James Dobson's Family Talk.
Christian parents are on the hook today because they have to identify the threats to the value system that's being taught to their children in public schools, and their job is to protect their kids from these influences.
Tune in for Family Talk with Dr. James Dobson, weekdays at 6:30 a.m. and 9:30 p.m. on American Family Radio.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning into our program. God's blessings to you all.
Today's culture is opting for entertainment rather than biblical enlightenment. For those who resist that trend, Friends of Israel shows listeners why loving the Jewish people and supporting Israel is important to the Christian faith. Friends of Israel shares biblical truth about Israel and the Messiah and promotes solidarity with the Jewish people.
This is Chris Katolka of the Friends of Israel Today radio program, heard each weekend on this station, and here's what's happening in Israel.
Friends of Israel, Saturday afternoon at 2, here on American Family Radio.
Reminder, ladies and gentlemen, I will be at Ohio State University this Thursday, October 19th. It will be live streamed, Lord willing. If you're anywhere near Ohio State, anyone can attend. It is not just for students, although we do tend to get a lot of students. Eric Chabot, the Ratio Christi director there, does a great job of getting people there, does great ministry there on the Ohio State campus. Then the following week, we're going to be at several colleges. On the 23rd, we are going to be at Northwest Missouri State University. That's in Maryville, Missouri. And then the next night, the 24th, we're going to be at Missouri Western State University. That's in St. Joseph's, Missouri. And then on Thursday, the 26th, Lord willing, we'll be at Auburn University. There's been some baptisms out there lately, so looking forward to going there. And the following week we'll be at the University of Cincinnati. That's going to be on November 2nd. Also, we've got the Galatians online course, verse by verse, starting October 23rd. Go to crossexamine.org, click on online courses. You'll see it there. I will be your instructor. Before we get back to Dr. Paul Copan, things are changing on the ground in Israel every couple hours, as you know. We're recording this on Wednesday, October 11th. By the time you hear it, might be a few days later, so things may have changed. But Abu Abida, who is the spokesperson for Hamas, recently said this: any targeting of innocent civilians without warning will be met regretfully by executing one of the captives in our custody, and we will be forced to broadcast this execution. Now, parenthetically, ladies and gentlemen, so far the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the BBC won't call these people terrorists. They call them gunmen. Okay? You need to know where you're getting your information from. And as Cal Thomas famously said, every day I read the Bible and the New York Times just to see what both sides are doing. Okay? These people can't call a spade a spade. They can't call a terrorist a terrorist. And I think it's disgraceful. What is going on in Israel now, regardless of any fault Israel has ever had, there is no justification for brutally murdering children, raping women, filming their bodies desecrated, and broadcasting execution of women and children hostages because the people that you surprise attack retaliate. Now, Paul, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the Amalekites. Those are people that wanted to destroy Israel in Old Testament times, even before they got into the land. When they're at Mount Sinai, you mentioned that battle that's recorded in the book of Exodus. Were any of these other tribes like Hamas, as far as we know, that they wanted the exile? Obviously, they didn't have Islamic theology that came centuries later, millennia later. But were they intent on destroying Israel?
Yeah, we mentioned the earlier Amorite kings in Numbers 21, and again, this is recounted hyperbolically in Deuteronomy chapters 2 and 3. We also read in the book of Joshua that when the Gibeonites, Canaanite people make a treaty with the Israelites, then a whole bunch of Canaanite kings assemble together to fight against Israel as well as Gibeon. So it is a retaliation for that treaty that was made. And so the Israelites are indeed fighting again for, we could say, survival. In this case, keep in mind that what's going on with the Israelites is, one, they are not militarily equipped. They are not a fighting people. Secondly, they are going to a place that has cities that seem impregnable. Thirdly, the Lord says that these people are more numerous than you are. And so you've got all these disadvantages. So no wonder the Lord tells Joshua, don't be afraid, because there's a lot of reason to be afraid. And you have this reminder that if the Israelites are going to defeat the Canaanites, it's going to have to be because of God and not because they are the ones who are doing this. Keep in mind that the Israelites are not to be seen as this superior military force coming in on these hapless Canaanites who are just minding their own business and not engaging in any kind of wicked behavior like incest, bestiality, ritual prostitution, infant sacrifice, things obviously that would be considered horrific and criminal in any society today. Or any modern society, civilized society. So you do have that kind of...
Not Hamas, apparently.
Pardon?
Yeah. It's not Hamas,
exactly.
Apparently. They're okay with killing babies. And unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, so are we. Let's remember that we've killed 60 million babies in this country.
Yeah.
And as we look at revulsion as to what's going on in Hamas, maybe we ought to go home and look in the mirror sometimes too. But sorry to interrupt, Paul, but go ahead.
Good word. Yeah, thank you. So you have these. So you have this kind of the attack against the Israelites by, again, it's recounted in the treaty with the Gibeonites, recounted in Joshua 9, and then in chapter 10 there is this assault on the Israelites. We do have again the Amalekites. I mentioned Joshua. I mentioned Exodus, but they're also in the book of 1 Samuel 15. We have the Amalekites who have in chapter 14. The Amalekites have just raided in 1448. They have just raided the Israelites, and so there is this response, and so there is this this attack that has come against the Israelites once again. So you have people who do have it out for the Israelites. You do have, say, the Philistines who are coming against the Israelites in say 1 Samuel. If the early chapters of 1 Samuel, you also have in the book of Judges the Midianites and others who are coming to undermine the Israelites. I spend a good bit of time in the Vindictive Bully book talking about the passage in Numbers 25 and then Numbers 31, where we have the Midianites who are seeking to derail God's covenant with the Israelites. Again, this is the redemption of the world is at stake. The identity of Israel is at stake. The mission that Israel has to carry out to the ends of the earth, to bring blessing. This is in the balance. And so the Israelites end up capitulating through the seduction of the Midianites and engaging in sexual immorality and idolatry. And it says that they broke covenant with God who brought them out of Egypt. So this is a very serious undermining. To bring a curse on Israel, again, remember the context here in Numbers 22, Balak, the king of Moab, is seeking to bring a curse upon the Israelites through the pagan prophet Balaam. And God keeps on giving them blessings and curse. Balaam finds another way of subterfuge to undermine the covenant with God and to bring a curse on Israel in this way. So I have a number of comments to make on that, and even the retaliation response in Numbers 31.
There's so much more in the Vindictive Bully book. He's got a Vindictive Bully, friends. You need to get it. If you're just tuning in, we're talking to Dr. Paul Copan about his new book. He's got a Vindictive Bully, and we're looking at it in the context of what's happening in Israel right now. That Hamas, which means violence in Hebrew, is an organization that in their charter has said they want to exterminate Israel. They want to create an Islamic state, and as you've seen in the past week, they will do almost anything to women, children, even babies to reach that goal. And my question for Dr. Copan. Are there any parallels to this in the Old Testament? Were there tribes in the Old Testament that had a similar antipathy toward Israel, that they wanted Israelites dead? And we're finding that, yes, certainly the Amalekites and maybe the Midianites and some of these other groups did have a similar viewpoint. Obviously, it wasn't an Islamic viewpoint because Islam came along 2,000 or so years later. But the question is, what is a group of people supposed to do, Dr. Copan, when another group of people in the area in which they live seek their annihilation? What is biblical? What can and should be done?
Yeah, I mean, we can bring up even the Psalms here, and where and other texts where the Edomites, for example, are engaged in Psalm 1. I talk about the imprecatory Psalms, those harsh-sounding Psalms in, like, for example, 137, which is probably the harshest. But there's also a context here where the Edomites are actually violating a treaty of brotherhood, a covenant, because remember Jacob and Esau. Esau is the forefather, the father of the Edomites. That when the Israelites are in disarray, in distress, when the Babylonians have come in, you have the Edomites are actually leading their own flesh and blood into the hands of the Babylonians. So you have that kind of an action, a treacherous action against the Israelites. And we see this picked up on in the book of Amos 2. We see in Amos 2 and 3 that the Lord is going to send fire on those nations surrounding Israel, and again mentioning Edom because of their treachery, because of the way that they treated their flesh and blood, and the Israelites were not to go into the land of Canaan and to attack the Edomites, or Moab or Ammon for that matter, who were the offspring of Lot, Abraham's nephew. But it is again for those who are practicing these heinous acts that God sends judgment upon them to drive out these nations who are acting wickedly in this way, and who could have a corrosive influence on the nation of Israel. I'd also say that keep in mind that there is a short-term push against these Canaanites, but there is a long-term desire to bring blessing to them. In the short term, these Canaanites are obstructing the global mission that God has for the Israelites to bring blessing to the nations, again, coming through the Messiah, Jesus. But God still has the desire to bring in these nations into his saving purposes. We read in the Psalms about the Jebusite coming in, or the Philistine, or others, these enemies of the people of God, Isaiah chapter 19, Assyria and Egypt, that God has this long-range purpose to bring salvation to these who are initially enemies of the Israelites, but God seeks to bring reconciliation to them. And that's why it's kind of interesting to see even in chapter 15 of Matthew, where Jesus goes to this Canaanite woman and helps her in her need, and so she finds salvation. It's remarkable to see that it's kind of come full circle, that what was to be an act of removing the obstacle, now the goal has been reached by this Canaanite woman coming to faith in Jesus Christ.
There's so much more with Dr. Paul Copan. His new book, Is God a Vindictive Bully? Will help you understand the Old Testament, and it will also give you insights into what's going on now. Were there parallels in the Old Testament to what's going on now? We're back in just 2 minutes. Don't go anywhere.
Heaven changes everything. That was our theme for our fall share-a-thon here at American Family Radio. Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman. I'm the president of AFA and American Family Radio. Just wanted to say thank you for giving during share-a-thon. Our loyal listeners always come through, and we can't make it without you. Your prayers, your financial support, just so vitally important to what we do here. So just wanted to say thank you. Have a great day. Keep listening to AFR.
Sandy Rios 24/7. It's not a morning show, it's an all-day show, fueled by the wit and wisdom of Sandy Rios.
If you have a smartphone, I think you should download the AFR app.
Sandy Rios 24/7 is on the podcast page at afr.net.
I have, so many listeners from the radio show who are now listening to the podcast.
Sandy Rios 24/7.
You're with my prayers all the time.
Sandy Rios 24/7 on the podcast page at afr.net.
This is Walker Wildman with AFR, and we're sending Bibles. Here's Michael with Bible League International.
Walker the man Tembe lives in Mozambique, Africa. He grew up as the grandson of the village witch doctor, so he had no idea who Jesus is. But he eventually married, had 2 sons. One day those sons went missing. They put together a search party. They found out these boys had been murdered, killed at the hands of the grandfather and his world of demons and child sacrifice. This put Tembe and his wife into a severe depression. A Christian invited them to come learn about Jesus, and they have now come to place their faith in him. But the story doesn't end there. They've gone on to lead 200 people to Christ who look at these two and they see people who have the grace and gumption to move forward in life. And listen, every gift today as we send Bibles to Mozambique and other parts of the world will be doubled. Walker?
$5 sends 1 Bible. Yes, that's $5 for 1 Bible. $100 sends 20, and $500 sends 100 Bibles. Give generously at 800-YES-WORD, 800-YES-WORD, or visit sendbiblesnow.org. Sendbiblesnow.org.
If the Palestinians laid down their weapons, there would be no more war. If Israel laid down their weapons, there would be no more Israel. I'm paraphrasing Golda Meir, who was a prime minister of Israel many years ago. Benjamin Netanyahu has said something like this recently. I'm not suggesting that everything Israel does is righteous. Sometimes they do evil as well, but generally speaking, it's the Palestinians that want to eradicate the Israelis. It's not the other way around. Although now, quite obviously, Hamas has given Israel at least some grounds to say we need to take out the terrorist element in the Gaza Strip. In fact, one Israeli military person said we're going to turn Gaza into basically a tent city. That's what they think they're going to do now. Now, if that's an exaggeration, we'll see. Tragically, a lot of innocent civilians will die if that happens. There's more than 2 million people living in the Gaza Strip. It's only 25 miles by 4 or 5 miles wide. And it's a difficult place to be. So, but what's Israel supposed to do now? Paul, what do you think of that statement from Golda Meir? Do you think she was accurate with that?
Yeah, I think that is accurate. And of course, when we look at the Israelites, when the Palestinians are willing to talk peace, Israel is willing to sit down at the table with them. Now you have the various accords, Oslo and others, where there's this willingness on the part of Israel to even give land, and so you have this repudiation, however, on the part of the Palestinian Authority to cede anything to Israel. And so there is that kind of a catch-22. If the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, capitulates slightly, he's gone. Yasser Arafat had that fear. He said, I don't want to be drinking tea with Anwar Sadat, who was assassinated. I don't want to be drinking tea with him in the afterlife because I'm capitulating or I'm ceding anything to the Israeli cause. So it's basically been this kind of a reluctance to give any ground to Israel, whereas the Israelis have given ground, they've given land to those who are in the Palestinian territories. And so I think you're right about that.
Many years ago, it must have been in the 90s when President Clinton was the president, they had negotiated almost a 2-state solution where there was a part where one part of Israel would be 9 miles wide, and Yasser Arafat rejected the deal. Which just goes to show, as you just mentioned, they're not really interested in that. They're not really interested in negotiating anything. They want Israel destroyed. If he agreed to that, he would have probably been executed.
Yeah, that's right.
And so it's a really hard problem over there. Obviously, the atrocities that have been committed in this surprise attack can't be tolerated, can't be sugarcoated, and ought not be. And yet it does give us a sense, if this kind of action was taken by the Canaanite tribes on Israel, or even on their own people, you can understand why God would have said after 400 years, all right, this needs to end. And if we're going to get the promised people in the promised land to bring forth the promised Messiah, and these people are in the way, and we've warned them for 400 years to stop these practices, that last resort is what God has to resort to. And if Christianity is true that people don't die, they just change location. They go from this life to the next life, and it's up to God when that happens. So that's what happened in the Old Testament, and it's going to be curious to see what happens now, Paul, with this awful situation over there in the Holy Land.
I mean, I'm like you, someone who believes in the appropriateness of just war, that the goal of a just war is to bring a fair peace between the warring parties, but in the meantime, the kind of actions that have been taken, the kind of offensive action taken against Israel, or again, I think of the Second World War and Nazi and Japanese aggression. It was justifiable to respond, to retaliate, to bring these two nations and their allies into submission to each other, to the Allied forces, in order to bring about a global peace, to bring stability to the world. So, as G.K. Chesterton said, it's not out of hate that this is done. He said that a just war is not. You don't go to war because you hate the people in front of you, but because you love the people behind you. And I think that that's exactly what we're seeing here in Israel as well.
Paul, I have to ask you, because in the Vindictive Bully book, you make this argument that I think many people have never seen, and they've overlooked it. In fact, some of your critics, or people that think the God of the Old Testament can't be tolerated, people like Peter Enns and Randall Rouser and Greg Boyd, don't realize what you have uncovered by just reading the Bible, that Jesus brings judgment. Can you unpack that?
Yeah, Jesus is like an Old Testament prophet declaring judgment that's coming on Jerusalem. He's warning them. And he's also affirming that judgments took place in the Old Testament in Matthew 11. If the miracles performed in you, he's telling Chorazin and Bethsaida, if they had been performed in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented in sackcloth and ashes. And so Jesus is speaking about the judgment that is to come. He also uses very forceful language. He says that if in Matthew 18:6, if someone leads one of my little ones astray, it'd be better for him to have a millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. In Jude 5, our best Greek manuscripts it says, Jesus, after he had delivered the Israelites from Egypt, destroyed those who did not believe. Jesus is the one. It's a Trinitarian understanding of God's action in the Old Testament, and Jesus is bringing judgment upon those complaining, idolatrous, adultery-prone Israelites. And so Jesus is involved in this. We see in the New Testament that the hand of the Lord, it not only brings people to faith in Jesus Christ in Acts 11, but in Acts 13, the hand of the Lord it comes upon Elymas, and he's struck blind. We see at the beginning of Acts 12, and right in between those two chapters, where you have the angel of the Lord delivering Peter out of prison, something positive, something good. But at the end of that chapter, Herod is struck down by the angel of the Lord because of his impiety, because of his pride, because of his blasphemy. So we see Jesus himself in red letters in Revelation chapter 2 saying to to Jezebel, this false prophetess, and her followers, he said, I will, he's going to cast Jezebel on a bed of sickness, and he said, I will strike dead her followers. This is Jesus. And it reminds us of what Paul says in Romans 11:22. Behold then the kindness and severity of God. I think a lot of these critics, both inside as well as outside the church, they think that wrath and love are actually incompatible with each other. But as N.T. Wright said, sometimes people are so wicked that you have to pray judgment upon them. He said also that if God is not wrathful, then he is not loving. And that's one of the themes that I'm bringing out in this book, is God, a Vindictive Bully, to show that this is indeed the case, to say, Jesus, reveals the Father to us and saying, forgive them, Father, forgive them, or turn the other cheek. It's that same Jesus who's actually engaged in driving the money changers out of the temple, who is engaged in these actions against the Israelites in the Old Testament, because, in bringing judgment upon them, striking them down. So there's kind of a cherry picking that is often going on with people like Greg Boyd. They select certain verses, but they ignore the other ones where Jesus is fierce, where we see the wrath of the Lamb. And there's also called for even the saints who are redeemed, who've been martyred. In Revelation 6, it says, "How long, O Lord, until you avenge our blood that has been shed by those who dwell upon the earth?" Again, a lot of these sorts of texts aren't mentioned by Greg Boyd. He just ignores them when you look them up in the index, one after another, boom, 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 just ignores them. And so we need to have a properly balanced picture. And Jesus is at the heart of judgment. He is telling the nation of Israel that judgment is coming. We see in Revelation 6 we read about the wrath of the Lamb, and people are fearful and calling on the rocks to fall upon them. That's Jesus.
Not only that, Paul, you also point this out, which is important for our listeners, that in addition to Israel pushing out the evil Canaanites, God comes behind Israel and then pushes out the evil Israelites, because it has to do with sin. It's not genocide, it's not ethnicity, it's sin. We only got a minute, but mention that, and then we'll...
Exactly. In Jeremiah 25, 9 through 11, we read God is telling the Israelites, or the people of Judah, the southern kingdom, that they're going to go into exile. He says, I'm going to use that language of utter destruction. I will utterly destroy you and leave your cities in everlasting desolation, which actually only lasts for 70 years. But they go into exile. So it's exile rather than extermination. And so when we see that language applied, we see clearly that this is not genocide.
That's so well studied, and the book is called Is God a Vindictive Bully, ladies and gentlemen, by my guest today, Dr. Paul Copan. And it's not just an update of Is God a Moral Monster. There's a lot of new material in there. In fact, it's a completely new book. Both of those books you ought to avail yourself of. Paul, where can people go online to learn more about you and what you're doing?
Well, I've got a website, paulcopan.com. You can see the stuff that I'm doing and writing about, and the books I've written and edited. You can also go to the Amazon page, where I've just various books on not just Old Testament stuff, but on philosophy of religion, apologetics in general, and Christianity and science, and all of those things. So a bunch of things to look at. I've edited or authored over 40 books. So a lot of things that I think are important and that Christians can avail themselves of.
And if you want a great place to get an undergraduate education, you can go to Palm Beach Atlantic University, where Dr. Paul Copan teaches. So check that out as well.
And also our MA Philosophy of Religion program. Get a master's degree there as well. So thanks for the encouragement to have people check it out.
Excellent. That's Dr. Paul Copan, ladies and gentlemen. Is God a Vindictive Bully? You really need to get that book and study it, because there's so many great answers to the questions that you have today. All right, please pray for the peace of Israel. Pray for Israel. Pray for Israel's enemies. Pray that people would come to know you and be saved eternally. That's what it's all about anyway. All right, friends, great to be with you. See you next week. God bless.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or
90.5 KTXG Greenville, Dallas.
Was a man that was full of life. Bert Harper of Exploring the Word.
He loved the Word of God, and it came across in the classroom. Dr. Travis put in my heart a desire to know God through His Word. And that's what we're trying to do on Exploring the Word.
Exploring the Word, weekday afternoons at 3 Central on American Family Radio. This is American Family Radio, a listener-supported ministry of the American Family Association.
This is a Word from Israel, a devotional moment to encourage you directly from the land of Israel with Shani Ferguson. Shani and her husband Kobe lead Ma'os Israel. Their goal is to fulfill the mandate to make followers of Yeshua and to help the needy among both Jewish and Arab communities. They emphasize prayer, worship, family disciple making, and empowering believers throughout Israel. And now, here's a Word from Israel.
Shalom from Jerusalem. We are getting into Hebrew words today, and often learning the depth or richness of a Hebrew word and its meaning.